The motion sensor in my hands gave me more satisfaction than my marriage had in months. When I fixed something in the garage, it stayed fixed. It responded logically, predictably. Unlike the man pacing behind me at midnight, his voice low and sharp as he spoke into his phone, every word cutting deeper than he realized. "Of course I'm talking to other women, Tina," he said, irritation dripping from every syllable. "I'm not going to limit myself when my wife isn't even my best option anymore." He thought I couldn't hear him over the whir of my screwdriver. He was wrong. My name is Raina Morrison, and until that night, I thought I was living the most ordinary kind of happiness in Edgewood Ridge. Former Army communications officer, owner of a small but thriving home security business, married for 15 years, one child, a quiet suburban life built on routine, responsibility, and trust, or so I believed. I set the sensor down slowly and turned around. Daniel still had his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, wearing the tailored slacks I'd bought him for our anniversary. The same slacks he said made him feel confident. Once that confidence had felt like strength. Now it felt like entitlement. "Raina's still in the garage," he continued, unaware. "Probably playing with her little gadgets. God, sometimes I wonder why I settled." Settled? It was amazing how one word could erase 15 years. I cleared my throat. Daniel spun around, eyes widening, color draining from his face. "I'll call you back," he muttered, ending the call too quickly, too guilty. "Rough night?" I asked, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. "I didn't know you were still out here," he said, running a hand through his hair. A nervous habit from when we were dating, back when his nerves were honest instead of rehearsed. "So," I said quietly, stepping closer, "I'm not your best option anymore." Silence pressed in around us. The garage felt smaller suddenly. Half-finished projects, unopened holiday boxes, family photos turned face down because looking at our smiles hurt too much. "You weren't supposed to hear that," he said. But I did. And in that moment, standing between broken tools and broken promises, I realized something terrifying and clarifying all at once. My marriage hadn't cracked. It had already collapsed. I just hadn't heard the alarm until now. And this was only the beginning. Before everything unraveled, before I learned how easily 15 years could be reduced to a single cruel sentence, my life looked solid from the outside. I was 38 years old, former Army communications officer. After I left the service, I poured everything I knew about precision, prevention, and preparedness into building a home security business in Edgewood Ridge. It wasn't flashy, but it was reliable. Motion sensors, alarms, surveillance systems, things that warned you before damage became permanent. I liked that logic. If something was wrong, you could trace it, fix it, reinforce it. Daniel and I met during my final year in uniform. He worked in marketing back then. Charming, articulate, always able to read a room. Where I was direct and grounded, he was smooth and aspirational. He liked to say I made him feel safe. I believed that meant something. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. He bought the ring himself. Nothing extravagant, but thoughtful. He got down on one knee in a quiet park. No audience, no spectacle. I said yes, because it felt steady. Because I trusted him. For a long time, that trust felt earned. We married, moved into our house in Edgewood Ridge, and built what everyone else called a good life. Daniel advanced in his career, shifting from one marketing firm to another, always chasing bigger titles, better circles. I built my business from scratch, sometimes working late in the garage, soldering wires and testing systems long after the house went quiet. We had our daughter, Jessie, 5 years into the marriage. Motherhood changed me in ways I didn't expect, softened some edges, sharpened others. Daniel loved her, but in a way that felt scheduled. He showed up for birthdays and school events, but the daily work, the listening, the patience, that fell mostly to me. Still, I told myself this was normal. Every marriage had uneven seasons. The first small cracks came quietly. Daniel began talking about potential a lot, about upward mobility, about how certain neighborhoods, certain friends, certain lifestyles mattered more than others. He started attending networking events that stretched late into the night. Client dinners, happy hours, conferences that didn't always line up on his calendar. When I asked questions, he'd smile and say, "You wouldn't enjoy it anyway. It's all talk." And maybe that was true. I preferred action to performance. His mother adored him and tolerated me. Her comments were never openly cruel, just sharp enough to sting. Little reminders that Daniel could have gone further if circumstances had been different, if he'd married differently. I swallowed those comments for the sake of peace. I told myself not to be sensitive. Daniel, meanwhile, grew restless. He complained about my time in the garage, about how I was always fixing things instead of living. He never mentioned that the garage paid the mortgage, or that my business covered the insurance that kept us comfortable when his commissions dipped. I ignored the imbalance because ignoring was easier than confronting. I ignored the way he checked his phone more than he checked on me, the way he dressed sharper for meetings than he ever did for date nights, the way he spoke about our marriage like it was a phase instead of a commitment. 15 years will train you to rationalize almost anything. By the time that night in the garage arrived, when I finally heard what he really thought of me, the truth was already there, layered under months of dismissal, subtle contempt, and emotional distance. I just hadn't wanted to see it, because seeing it meant admitting that the life I'd been protecting so carefully had been compromised from the inside. And once you know where the breach is, you can't unsee it. After that night in the garage, nothing exploded immediately. That was the strange part. Life didn't shatter all at once. It thinned. It stretched. It became tense in ways only people who live inside a breaking marriage can recognize. Conversations shortened. Silences grew longer. Every look carried weight. Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek in the mornings, asked about Jesse's homework, complained about traffic, but there was something calculated in his calm, like a man who believed he'd already won a game I didn't even know I was playing. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored for years. His phone was never out of reach. If a message came in, he'd tilt the screen away automatically. He began showering the moment he got home, as if washing off a version of himself he didn't want to bring inside. His wardrobe changed too. Better fabrics, sharper lines, clothes chosen to impress people I wasn't part of. When I asked about his day, his answers were vague. Meetings, contacts, strategy. Always strategy. His family started circling in subtle ways. His mother called more often, asking if Daniel seemed happy lately. His sister dropped comments about how ambitious men sometimes outgrow relationships that no longer matched their trajectory. They never said my name, but I heard it anyway. I felt like a problem being discussed in a room I wasn't invited into. One evening, Daniel mentioned a consulting firm downtown, Pinnacle Consulting, with a tone that lingered too long. He talked about the salary, the prestige, the kind of people who worked there. It sounded less like career ambition and more like escape. "You thinking of applying?" I asked. He hesitated just a fraction of a second. "Maybe, if the opportunity lines up." That pause stayed with me. A week later, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. Rooftop bar, downtown, 2 cocktails, not a client dinner, not a group event. When I asked him about it, he smiled easily. Networking, you know how it is. I did know how it was. Networking was his favorite word when he didn't want to explain himself. Friends began acting strangely, too. Maya, his closest confidant outside our marriage, suddenly knew details about my schedule I hadn't shared. She'd mention my garage hours casually, joke about how some people just live in their projects. Her smile never reached her eyes. I started remembering moments that hadn't made sense before. Daniel dismissing my concerns as paranoia, telling me I was too grounded to understand his world, saying I lacked vision. Vision. The word burned. At night, lying beside him, I felt the space between us like a physical thing. He'd turn away, scrolling on his phone, fingers moving quickly. Sometimes he'd smile at something on the screen, a small, private expression I hadn't seen directed at me in months. I didn't confront him, not yet. Part of me wanted proof, not because I needed justification to feel hurt, but because I needed to understand the scope of the betrayal. Emotional, physical, planned. Another part of me, the trained, disciplined part, knew that reacting without information was dangerous. Security isn't about panic. It's about observation. So I watched. I listened. And slowly, carefully, I began to realize something chilling. Daniel wasn't just drifting away. He was preparing. The morning everything tipped from suspicion into certainty began quietly. Too quietly. Daniel rushed out earlier than usual, already dressed, already distant. He said he had a breakfast meeting, another one, and kissed my cheek with the absent precision of habit. The door closed behind him, and the house exhaled. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the coffee he hadn't finished. That was when I saw his laptop, open, unlocked, sitting on the counter like it had given up trying to hide. Normally, I wouldn't have touched it. Privacy had always been a line I respected, even when trust was strained. But whatever version of normal we'd once lived by had died in the garage days earlier. I sat down. The screen glowed with his LinkedIn profile, or what used to be his LinkedIn profile. New photo, new bio, updated job description, and one detail missing that made my chest tighten. No mention of me. No married, no family-oriented, nothing. I scrolled, my pulse steady but heavy, like I was descending stairs into a place I already knew I wouldn't like. That's when I noticed a folder on the desktop. Personal projects. Something about the name felt wrong. Inside was a PowerPoint file. Ideal partner requirements. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. For a moment, I considered closing the laptop and pretending I hadn't seen it. That moment passed. I clicked. Slide 1, a clean title page, professionally formatted using his company's template. His headshot in the corner. His name beneath it. Slide 2, core attributes. Physical appearance, age range, fitness level, all listed, all ranked. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept going. Slide 3, financial compatibility. Income brackets, asset growth potential, lifestyle expectations. I stared at the numbers, recognizing the subtle insult in each carefully chosen metric. Slide 4, social and career trajectory. Connections, influence, access. Access. My hands began to shake, but my mind stayed painfully clear. This wasn't fantasy. It wasn't venting. It was strategy. Slide after slide broke a marriage down into bullet points and percentages. Reduced 15 years. Birthdays, deployments, sleepless nights, a daughter, to an evaluation grid. Then I reached the final slide. Bold red text. Current situation, suboptimal. Action required. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at that word, suboptimal, until it hollowed something out in me. That was when I understood the truth in full. Daniel wasn't having doubts. He was conducting an exit review. I closed the file slowly and leaned back in the chair, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Every late night, every vague excuse, every dismissive comment lined up perfectly now, like pieces snapping into place. He thought he was smarter than me. He thought I wouldn't notice. But he'd forgotten something fundamental. I build security systems for a living. I understand vulnerabilities. And the biggest vulnerability in any system is arrogance. I didn't confront him when he got home. Not that night, not the next. I moved through the house calmly, speaking when necessary, listening more than I ever had before. While he prepared for his upcoming interview at Pinnacle Consulting, treating it like a lifeboat, I prepared too. Not emotionally, methodically. I spent 3 days working late in the garage just as he expected. To him, I was distracted, occupied, harmless. In reality, I was constructing something far more precise than any alarm system. Daniel had designed a presentation to evaluate partners like business assets. So I built one too. Same layout, same fonts, same company branding, his headshot, his name. But instead of ideal partner requirements, my version focused on something else entirely. An analytical breakdown of male performance metrics framed as business compatibility indicators. Clinical language, charts, ratings. And a final slide titled, Why Size and Performance Matter in Strategic Relationships. It was absurd. It was humiliating. And it was indistinguishable from something he might plausibly create. See, that was the beauty of it. 30 minutes before he left for his interview, I replaced his original file. He didn't notice. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his laptop bag, and walked out the door smiling, convinced his escape plan was finally activating. My phone rang at 10:47 a.m. Rena, Daniel's voice cracked. Something terrible happened. I leaned against the counter, calm in a way that felt almost surreal. What's wrong? I asked. My presentation. Something went wrong. The wrong file opened. It was disgusting. They escorted me out. They're talking about legal action. I closed my eyes, breathing evenly. That's awful, I said softly. What kind of file was it? He couldn't answer. Because some truths are too revealing to say out loud. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. After the call ended, the house fell into a silence so deep it rang in my ears. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, letting the reality of what I'd done settle into my body. My pulse was steady, my breathing controlled. There was no rush of triumph, just a calm, almost clinical awareness. Daniel was unraveling, and I was still standing. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the quiet street. Edgewood Ridge looked exactly the same as it always had. Neatly trimmed lawns, parked cars, the illusion of order. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside my chest, everything had. When Daniel came home that evening, he moved like a man carrying invisible weight. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw tight. He barely looked at me as he dropped his keys on the counter. "They humiliated me," he said finally, his voice flat. "Security walked me out like I was some kind of criminal." I turned to face him slowly. That must have been awful. He studied my expression, searching for something. Sympathy, guilt, confirmation. I gave him none of it. "You don't think this just happened, do you?" he asked. I tilted my head slightly. "You think someone did it on purpose?" "Yes." His eyes sharpened. "This wasn't a glitch. Someone sabotaged me." I folded my arms, grounding myself. "Who would do that, Daniel?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw it. Fear, not of losing his job prospects, of being exposed. "I don't know," he said, "but I'm going to find out." "You should," I replied, "because if someone did interfere, that's serious." He stared at me across the counter, trying to read me the way he'd always believed he could. But 15 years of marriage had taught me how to keep my face neutral when it mattered. The army had done the rest. "You're very calm," he said slowly. "I've had time to think," I answered. "Maybe too much time." That night, we ate dinner in near silence. Jesse was at a friend's house, leaving the space between us unbuffered. Daniel pushed food around his plate without really eating. I watched him, not with anger, but with a kind of detached curiosity. This was the man who had ranked me on a slide. Later, in bed, he turned away from me, typing furiously on his phone. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts cycling through questions I hadn't allowed myself to ask before. When did he stop seeing me as a partner? How long had I been a liability in his mind? And why had I been so willing to shrink to make him comfortable? I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I wasn't ashamed either. Because for the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't reacting to his choices. I was responding to them. And that difference mattered. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Nate, a longtime friend who owned Murphy's Bar downtown and had once worked in law enforcement. "Heard about Daniel's interview disaster. You okay?" I stared at the screen, then typed back. "I'm fine, just one of those things." A lie, but a necessary one. Because something inside me had shifted. I could feel it, quiet, firm, irreversible. Daniel thought the worst had already happened. He had no idea how much worse the truth could be. The fallout didn't stop with Daniel's failed interview. It spread. In Edgewood Ridge, nothing stayed contained for long. Information traveled through coffee shops, dog walks, neighborhood message boards, whispered first, then spoken openly. By the next morning, people were already filling in the blanks with their own versions of the story. Daniel stayed home from work, pacing the house like a caged animal. He made calls behind closed doors, his voice tight and defensive. I heard fragments through the walls, words like misunderstanding, technical issue, out of context. He was trying to salvage control, but control was slipping faster than he realized. By noon, his phone rang again. This time, he put it on speaker without thinking. It was his mother. "Daniel, what is going on?" she demanded. "I just got off the phone with Karen. Everyone is talking." I didn't move. I kept sorting paperwork at the dining table, listening. "Mom, it's being blown out of proportion," he said. "Someone sabotaged me." "Sabotaged you how?" she snapped. "People are saying things. Inappropriate things." Silence. Then she continued, colder now. "You embarrassed yourself, and you embarrassed this family." He glanced at me, jaw clenched. "This isn't my fault." "Well, it doesn't look good," she said, "and neither does your marriage, apparently. Maybe you should focus less on ambition and more on damage control." She hung up before he could respond. Daniel slammed his phone down and turned toward me. "You see what's happening? They're turning on me." "They?" I asked calmly. "Everyone," he said. "My firm, my family, people I worked for years to impress." I met his gaze. Funny how quickly admiration disappears when the image cracks. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That afternoon, his sister stopped by unannounced. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You've been reckless," she said. "Whatever game you thought you were playing, it's over." Daniel bristled. "You don't know the whole story." "I know enough," she replied. "And so do people downtown. Do you have any idea how hard it is to recover from something like this?" She looked at me then, really looked. "I'm sorry," she said stiffly. "This must be uncomfortable for you." Uncomfortable. I almost laughed. After she left, Daniel rounded on me. "You're enjoying this." "No," I said quietly. "I'm observing it." That evening, more cracks appeared. A former colleague called, supposedly to check in. Another message came through from someone he'd once seen as a mentor, short, distant, final. Connections dried up one by one, like valves closing in a system under stress. And then there was Maya. She called while Daniel was in the shower. I answered. "Raina," she said, voice syrupy with concern. "I heard what happened. Is Daniel okay?" "He's managing," I replied. "I always thought he was ambitious," she said carefully. "Sometimes too ambitious." I could almost hear her smiling. "You've been very well informed," I said. There was a pause. "Small town." "Yes," I agreed. "It is." When I hung up, I sat very still, because patterns were emerging. Maya knew too much, too quickly. She'd been the first to spread details about the interview, the first to frame Daniel's downfall as inevitable, and now, the first to pretend sympathy. Daniel came downstairs later, exhausted, defeated. He sat across from me at the table, rubbing his temples. "Everything's falling apart," he said. I studied him, really studied him, for the first time, without nostalgia blurring the edges. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't confident. He was afraid. "I don't know who to trust," he admitted. I folded my hands. "Maybe that's something you should have thought about before you started evaluating people like assets." His head snapped up. "What did you say?" "Nothing," I replied evenly, just thinking out loud. He stared at me, suspicion flickering behind his eyes. But suspicion without proof is useless, and I made sure he had none. That night, while Daniel slept restlessly beside me, I lay awake, piecing everything together. His behavior, the presentation, the interview, Maya's timing, the way certain truths always surfaced at the most damaging moment. This wasn't just about one act of betrayal anymore. It was about a system that had been corroding for years, built on entitlement, secrecy, and the belief that consequences were for other people. And systems like that always collapse under pressure. The only question left was how much damage they would cause on the way down. The night everything finally went quiet was the hardest. Not loud, not explosive, just hollow. Daniel stopped fighting after that week. No more frantic calls, no more pacing. He moved through the house like a guest, overstaying his welcome, careful not to touch anything that might remind him this life had once felt permanent. That scared me more than his anger ever had, because anger meant resistance. Silence meant collapse. One evening, after Jesse had gone to bed, Daniel sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the dark television screen. The room smelled faintly of reheated food neither of us had really eaten. "I don't think TechFlow is going to keep me," he said quietly. I didn't answer right away. "They put me on administrative leave," he continued. "An investigation. Confidentiality issues. Professional conduct." I nodded slowly. "That's serious." He laughed once, bitter and short. "My entire career, gone because of one mistake." One mistake. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but grief. Grief for the years I'd spent believing we were building something together. Grief for the woman I'd been when I thought loyalty alone could hold a marriage upright. "You're not even angry anymore," he said, finally looking at me. "Why?" I met his eyes. "Because anger still assumes there's something left to protect." That landed harder than any accusation. Later that night, after he went upstairs, I stayed in the garage alone. The place that had once felt like escape now felt like a confession booth. Every unfinished project a reminder of how often I'd chosen fixing things over confronting them. I sat on the cold concrete floor, my back against the workbench, and let myself feel it fully for the first time. The humiliation, the betrayal, the quiet erosion of being reduced to a suboptimal option. I thought about the younger version of myself, confident, capable, certain of her worth. Somewhere along the way, I'd allowed Daniel's ambition to define the value of my steadiness. I'd mistaken endurance for strength. And in doing so, I'd lost sight of myself. That realization hurt more than anything Daniel had done. I wasn't proud of the sabotage. I wasn't proud of the satisfaction I felt watching his carefully curated image crumble. But I understood why I'd done it. I'd needed proof that I wasn't invisible, that I still had agency. Still, sitting there alone in the dark, the victory felt thin. Because destruction, even justified, doesn't automatically heal what's been hollowed out. Upstairs, I heard Daniel moving around, opening drawers, closing them again. The sound of a man realizing there was nowhere left to go, no promotion to hide behind, no audience to impress. And for the first time since this began, fear crept in, not of him, but of the future. What happens after the truth? What happens when the adrenaline fades and all that's left is the wreckage of a life you once believed in? I pressed my palms to my eyes, breathing through the weight of it. This was the lowest point, not because I had lost him, but because I had lost the illusion that love alone could protect me from being discarded. And once that illusion breaks, you can never go back to who you were before. You can only decide who you're going to become next. The shift didn't come with a dramatic confrontation. It came with clarity. The next morning, I woke before dawn, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to anymore. The house was quiet. Daniel's side of the bed was empty. He'd fallen asleep on the couch again, a silent acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sky lighten. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't racing. They were aligning. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from Nate. "You busy this morning? I think there's something you should know." We met at Murphy's bar before it officially opened. The place smelled like old wood and cleaner, familiar and grounding. Nate poured coffee instead of beer and slid into the booth across from me, his expression serious in the way it had been back when he wore a badge. "I've been hearing things," he said. "Not gossip, patterns." I stayed quiet. "Maya's been talking," he continued, "a lot, to the wrong people. She's been telling different versions of Daniel's story, depending on who's listening. Some of them don't line up." I felt something click into place. "She knew about the interview before most people did," I said slowly. "And she's always been very informed." Nate nodded. "She's been positioning herself as the concerned friend while quietly spreading details that make sure the damage sticks." "So she's not just observing," I said. "She's amplifying." "Exactly," Nate replied. "And there's more. Daniel wasn't as careful as he thought. Public places, digital traces, nothing illegal, but enough to show a pattern of behavior that doesn't look good." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about truth surfacing on its own. When I got home, Daniel was sitting at the table, staring at his phone like it might deliver a miracle. "I need to talk to you," he said. "So do I replied. He looked surprised, then wary. "I know you think I ruined everything," he began, "but I never meant for it to go this far." I studied him, not with anger, not with hope, but with clear-eyed honesty. "You didn't think it would go this far because you never thought there would be consequences," I said. "You evaluated people. You optimized your options. You forgot they were human." He swallowed. "I made mistakes." "Yes," I said, "and I'm done carrying the weight of them." He searched my face. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm stepping out of the system you built," I answered. "I'm not competing. I'm not defending myself. And I'm not shrinking so you can feel larger." Something shifted in his expression then. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. That night, I packed a bag. Not in a rush, not in secret, just enough for a few days. When Jessie came home, I explained calmly, carefully, in words she could understand. "I'm going to take some space," I told her. "Not because of you. Never because of you." She hugged me tightly, and I held her like an anchor. As I closed the door behind me, I felt it. The moment where power quietly changes hands. Not through humiliation. Not through destruction, but through refusal. I wasn't playing his game anymore, and without my participation, it had nothing left to sustain it. I didn't announce my departure to the neighborhood. I didn't need to. In Edgewood Ridge, absence spoke louder than explanation. Within days of me stepping away from the house, the consequences Daniel had been trying to outrun began arriving without my involvement. I wasn't pushing them. I wasn't directing them. I was simply no longer shielding him from their impact. TechFlow's investigation moved quickly, too quickly for comfort. What had first been framed as a technical breach became something else entirely once people started comparing notes, emails forwarded, conversations remembered, timelines aligned. Daniel's administrative leave turned into a formal separation pending review. His access badge was deactivated. His calendar invitations quietly disappeared. Friends stopped calling. Not dramatically. Just gradually. Invitations dried up. Messages went unanswered. People who had once praised his ambition now described him as reckless and unprofessional. The same traits, just viewed from the other side of consequence. His family, too, recalibrated. His mother called me, not to apologize, not to take responsibility, but to ask what I planned to do next, as if my next step were another variable in Daniel's recovery plan. "I'm focusing on Jessie," I said simply. There was a pause, then carefully, "Daniel is struggling." "I know," I replied. "So am I, just differently." That conversation ended quickly. Maya's role unraveled, almost on its own. People noticed how often she'd known things before they were public, how eagerly she'd shared, how her concern always arrived wrapped in commentary. Once trust cracks, it spreads fast. By the end of the week, she'd stopped calling. Daniel tried once more. He showed up where I was staying, unannounced but subdued. No anger, no accusations, just exhaustion. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. I believed him. "That's the problem," I replied gently. "You never thought about the ending at all." He looked around, taking in the unfamiliar space. "Are you coming back?" I met his eyes and answered honestly. "I don't know, but I know I won't come back to what it was." He nodded slowly, like a man finally hearing something he couldn't negotiate. When he left, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Back in Edgewood Ridge, the story kept moving without me. It always does. People filled in the blanks, drew their own conclusions. Daniel became a cautionary tale whispered at gatherings he no longer attended. His name lost its shine, then its relevance. And me? I walked away quietly. No speeches, no revenge, no need to explain myself to people who had already chosen what they wanted to believe. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. It was doing just fine on its own. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. Mornings where I woke up without dread tightening my chest. Afternoons where silence felt peaceful instead of heavy. Evenings where I realized I hadn't checked my phone in hours because there was nothing I was waiting to hear. I moved back into the house eventually, but not as Daniel's wife. As myself. The garage became what it had always tried to be for me, a place of clarity. I finished projects I'd abandoned, not because anyone needed them, but because I did. When something malfunctioned, I fixed it. When it couldn't be repaired, I replaced it. That distinction mattered. Jessie adjusted in her own quiet, resilient way. We talked honestly, age-appropriately. I didn't villainize her father, and I didn't excuse him either. I showed her, by example, that self-respect wasn't loud, but it was non-negotiable. Daniel faded from my daily life. Not dramatically, just naturally. His messages became infrequent, then logistical, then unnecessary. He wasn't a monster, he was something more ordinary and more dangerous. A man who believed systems existed to serve him until one finally didn't. What I learned from all of this is simple, and I wish someone had told me sooner. If someone starts measuring your worth, they've already stopped loving you. If a partner talks about options, they've already made you one. And when you find yourself being evaluated instead of cherished, the most powerful thing you can do is step out of the equation entirely. You don't need to destroy anyone. You just need to stop protecting them from the consequences of who they've chosen to be. I used to think strength meant endurance, staying, fixing things no matter how broken they became. Now I know better. Real strength is recognizing when an alarm is telling you something vital and listening before the damage becomes permanent. Some systems aren't meant to be secured. They're meant to be shut down. And once you do, life gets very, very quiet. In the best possible way.